So I finally had a chance to swing the Minelab Manticore a bunch across multiple hunts. I found multiple silvers, some gold, relics, old coins, and much more. Still, don't consider this to be a review. This is just an early impression of the machine. But the number one question people are asking me is whether the machine has a falsing problem. My answer is no, it does not have a problem, but it does have a tendency. Yes, my answer is going to be a bit nuanced, so buckle yourself in and realize that there are certain behaviors of the machine that can come with both pros and cons. Now, don't be confused. All machines false in iron, and the Manticore is definitely the most falsing-prone machine that Minelab has ever released, that I've swung. But it does confer some performance advantages. This relates back to the whole thing about false positives that I've been talking about. The physics of the situation basically dictates that as a machine gets better at unmasking, it becomes more prone to false positives, specifically iron falses that sound a lot like a localized non-ferrous signal. Unmasking from a signal processing standpoint is about extracting an adjacent smaller non-ferrous signal from a much greater magnitude ferrous signal. Certain iron objects can produce falsing when off-center from the target and at specific orientations. This falsing sometimes produces a seemingly localized weaker non-ferrous signal adjacent to the larger ferrous signal. This means that the small high-tone chirp of a partially masked non-ferrous target near iron is essentially identical on paper to an iron false, and as such there is no reliable means to distinguish between the two. A corollary of this is then that a machine which unmasks better or has a tendency to produce a better tone in an iron masking situation will also have a tendency to produce better sounding tones on iron falses. In regards to real-world detectors, essentially at some point, the internal signal processing code of the detector has to make a call based on analysis of the received waveform. One can program this in such a way that it has a greater probability to make a non-ferrous call compared to ferrous. This detector will unmask in more situations, but also will give more situations in which you dig a good sounding signal and iron pops out, also known as a false positive. I've always said that Minelab tends to release detectors that aren't very prone to falsing, because it creates a good user experience in general, because most people don't like digging iron, and it makes the machine easier to use and learn. But the Manticore is sort of the opposite of that philosophy. The Manticore has the pro of being excellent at unmasking, but comes with the con of being more likely to false on iron. This is also true of the XP Deus II, though to a lesser degree. The Manticore is not intended for beginners or intermediates, and as such, in heavy iron, it can be difficult to use. It will require practice. It will require the user to make adjustments, but it also has high performance because of that. It absolutely has a steeper learning curve in heavy iron than, say, the Equinox, or even the XP Deus II. I have seen many people totally give up on the Manticore in heavy iron because of its tendency to false. And make no mistake, the machine does demand a lot of mental processing of signals from the user. Sorting through these little falses and chirps is very mentally demanding and fatiguing. It should be noted that through careful observation on the 2D screen, when you've identified an iron false, you can then adapt the custom ferrous limits geometry to eliminate the falsing from that particular object. So over time you can adjust the shape of the ferrous limits to your location to produce optimal performance. Don't get me wrong, this is not easy to do and requires a lot of time and effort and familiarity with adjusting these settings. For example, in a heavy iron farm field polluted primarily with iron nails, I'm going to more aggressively adjust the geometry of the upper ferrous limits to mitigate falsing on these smaller iron objects. If I'm on old land that has been polluted by somewhat newer industry and has larger pieces of steel and larger iron tools and equipment, then I'm going to more aggressively adjust the geometry of the lower ferrous limits. All right, so I want to show an example of what I mean by adapting the upper and lower ferrous limits to minimize falsing on nails that you find in your environment. So we have this iron nail here, and at most orientations, it's going to clearly call it iron. Most locations over the coil. But there's going to be some specific orientations, specific sweep directions that will make this false. And it's going to sound like that there's a mass target next to a larger piece of iron. For example, see, at this particular angle, if you sweep over it, it's going to sound like there's a non-ferrous target right there. So how do we combat this? We go into our custom ferrous limits. I've adjusted this one ahead of time, and you'll see that I've brought this center portion down. And now, in that same exact angle, it has been silenced and no longer falses anywhere over the coil. So we've eliminated the falsing of this particular nail. And indeed, I found that many of the nails in my environment reside in this sort of center box. Here's another one. And want the false by dipping down. So that one particular adjustment makes a huge difference in my environment in terms of falsing. It basically completely stabilizes the detector. Now, you could argue that, it would be better if the detector did that on its own. But that's kind of the problem and the genius of this sort of scheme of iron discrimination using a 2D plot, is that there's probably no shape that's optimal for every environment and every set of like iron objects. But you can tune it, you can adapt it to your environment, to the objects that you're encountering, to optimize the detector for your location, which I think is great, but out of the box it may not be optimized for your location, which is going to be problematic, especially because when you first get a detector like this, it's difficult to use, it's difficult to learn, you don't know how to make these adjustments. So with this particular detector, there's a prolonged suffering phase of where you at first really suffer because of failing to interpret what the detector is telling you and not knowing how to adjust and compensate for those problems. So then if we go back into, where did I set that now? So if we go back to the presets, we get rid of that little dip, and suddenly it falses. You see it sweep down. So that's basically what I'm talking about by adjusting the geometry. Now you might wonder, well, what am I going to lose because of that? Because every time you notch something out, and this is kind of like notching in 2 dimensions, you're going to lose something. Well, I tried to find some objects that fell along this line. And if you notice, it's basically right up against the line. Here's a button. Hits it, no problem. Here is a hammered coin. It's like 20% silver, 80% copper, and it's paper thin. Comes through perfectly. Here's a gold ring. 14 karat. I actually found this with the Manticore last week. Comes through. It's totally unaffected by those upper limits. Now if we take that same nail that was falsing, we combine it with the gold ring, for example. I'm just going to hold them together. You notice that it's still getting it. You notice that we can still get the gold ring, even with the iron nail. Same plane, essentially right next to it. And if you're wondering, yeah, the XP Deus II falses as well. It is difficult to get used to at first, and from the standpoint of a commercial product, I do think it is a bit problematic because it really demands a lot from the user. A quality that recent high-end machines have had, like the Equinox series, the XP Deus II, the Nocta Legend, is that basically anybody can turn them on and use a stock program and have essentially no issues regardless of their environment. They're basically turn on and go, which is a great thing from a product standpoint. But that beginner-friendly turn on and go style user experience doesn't quite exist on the Manticore, at least not always. It's very possible you will turn on the Manticore in your location and it will be perfectly fine. But it's also possible you'll turn on the Manticore in your location and it won't be entirely usable without immediate adjustment. That being said, I do not recommend the Manticore as your first or second machine because you must understand how to use all the options you have at your disposal in order to get the most out of this detector, which honestly makes this detector a bit of a challenge to learn even for experienced detectorists, because it appears to me, despite some superficial similarities between the Equinox, the Manticore fundamentally operates and processes signals in its own way, which gives it its own unique personality. It's not intended to be a beginner nor intermediate friendly detector, and as such will require you to learn the machine and spend time with it. For example, I was in really thick stubble with the Manticore. This was a plowed farm field which has that straw type stubble that is really thick and sturdy, and you have to swing your detector sort of aggressively through it, which causes the search coil to incur swing noise. Swing noise is any bump, vibration, shock, inconsistency in swing height, etc. that pollutes the signal, and this can cause falsing. The Manticore, because of its increased transmit power, its greater range of amplification settings, etc., is more prone to swing noise and does not like swinging in stubble without adjustment. It creates false signals constantly from the vibrations because of its increased power output. However, using the 2D discrimination, you can observe the location of the swing noise and eliminate it with great precision, which will then stabilize the detector. All of this extra power and extra amplification also amplifies swing noise, coil shocks, ground falsing, etc. And you need to know how to use the other settings like the Ferris limits and custom discrimination patterns to combat these issues in order to maintain the higher performance potential of the detector. Now, I really do hope in future updates that Minelab doesn't neuter this detector because a bunch of people gave up on it too early and didn't figure it out, declared it broken, didn't put in the time and effort necessary to learn this detector before they, jump to their conclusions. From a commercial product standpoint, it is definitely problematic to release a detector that is difficult to use and then have a bunch of people claim it is broken. But I will say, after swinging it for 6 hours, the mental fatigue of determining whether small chirps and falses are real targets can really weigh on you. The personality of the machine demands that you swing a little slower and with increased scrutiny and vigilance. It forces you to adopt a more methodical style, which is more mentally demanding and therefore more mentally fatiguing. Now, whether this extra falsing-prone behavior translates into more targets found, more targets unmasked, etc., is an entirely different question altogether, and I can't really say for certain whether it can find targets that other machines cannot, because I don't have that data. I haven't done the comparison in the field on real targets, in real conditions, in real soil. That being said, the Manticore behaves exactly like I would expect a higher transmit power detector to behave. This extra power requires extra effort from the user to utilize. Now, something else that I have noticed about this detector, something that I can't believe more people aren't talking about, in terms of EMI mitigation, the Manticore is in its own category above the other machines. This is the only simultaneous multi-frequency detector that I can walk under high-intensity power lines and get essentially no noise at a default level of sensitivity. Seriously, the Equinox and XP Deus II often can't get anywhere near high-intensity power lines without going totally bonkers. And frequently in those situations, no amount of noise canceling or frequency shifting helps. The Manticore, on the other hand, handles this EMI amazingly well. Seriously, I search a lot of farm fields that have high-intensity power lines going through them, and the XP Deus II and the Equinox can go totally crazy and become completely unusable in simultaneous multi-frequency modes near these high-power lines. Granted, you can usually switch to a single frequency and find something that works decent. Here's the Equinox 800 with default sensitivity in Park 1. Definitely some chatter. Here is the XP Deus II at 90 sensitivity in sensitive full tones default. Here is the Manticore in default sensitivity in the all-terrain general program. It is simply amazing at EMI mitigation, both in terms of its increased transmit power, which improves the signal-to-noise ratio, the advanced adaptive algorithms which identify and eliminate noise, and the ability to take a larger sample of EMI data across the frequency shifts with a long press. Together, these features combine to make a detector that appears to me to be very clearly in its own category in terms of EMI mitigation. It's leaps and bounds better than the Equinox 800 or the XP Deus II in this category, and as a result has unlocked tons more territory for me to search. In fact, near power lines where I'd have to lower the Equinox and XP Deus II sensitivity well below the default or switch to single frequencies, I can sometimes actually raise the sensitivity above the default on the Manticore. Seriously, the Manticore is the best SMF detector at handling EMI by far, in my experience so far, mostly in relation to high intensity power lines. And I haven't exposed it to all the different flavors of EMI. And there are different types of EMI out there. But even in my living room near my wireless router, I have to lower the default sensitivity of the Equinox 800 and the XP Deus II quite a bit to stable it up. Whereas with the Manticore, it's stable at default sensitivity, and I can even increase the sensitivity. Now here are some things early on that I'm really liking about the Manticore. I really like the screen, the menus, the user interface is great. I love the soft keys and being able to adapt the user interface to the detecting scenario. For example, if you're in an area with problematic ground, you can assign a soft key to ground balance. Or if you're in an area with problematic EMI, you can assign a soft key to noise cancellation. I would like to see their functionality expanded, and I think there's tons of potential here. For example, you could have a soft key that increases and decreases Ferris limits, toggles through your Ferris limit presets, or a function that immediately clears the 2D screen would be nice. Sometimes I'm finding myself waiting for the 2D screen to clear when I'm cycling between, say, long sweeps and short wiggles, or a soft key with the ability to swap between depth audio theme back to all tones, for example. I really think Minelab can do a ton more with these soft keys. I'm hoping to see some expanded functionality in future updates. To expose one of my biases, I really like Minelab tones, like the timbre of their audio more than other machines. And the audio on the Manticore is great. The audio options are great. Look into enhanced audio if you're still struggling with interpreting the machine's information-dense audio response. You'll find that enhanced audio can help out quite a bit in interpreting what's a real signal and what's just chatter. Ergonomically speaking, it's a clear improvement over the Equinox 800, even if the shaft is a little bit hard to align perfectly and consistently across multiple hunts. Its ability to twist is nice when putting it into a backpack. It's a little less nice when trying to set it up because it's very, very easy to get like off angle. There's no marks on the shaft that kind of like help you line it up either. Overall, so far, I'm finding the Minelab Manticore to be a very capable detector now that I've gotten over that initial hurdle of figuring out how to tame the machine, how to tune it to my heavy iron environment, etc. Make no mistake though, it is highly demanding of the user compared to other companies' flagship detectors. It's a highly alertive detector, and I don't mean that it's loud or anything like that. When I say it's a highly alertive detector, I just mean its signal processing is tuned rather aggressively towards alerting as opposed to ignoring something. I also think the 2D screen is essential to properly operating the detector. It's not some gimmick thrown on top, but rather it is providing valuable information that must be incorporated into your analysis. This includes making adjustments to the Ferris limits and discrimination patterns. Now, whether the juice is worth the squeeze remains to be seen. Like, is all this extra effort worth it? Is it worth to learn this detector? Will the difficulty of this detector eventually translate into me finding more things down the road? I don't know yet. Metal detecting is a hobby where when you buy a new machine, it almost automatically makes you a worse detectorist just because you don't have experience with that machine. And having experience with the machine is essential to getting all of the potential out of that machine. So anybody trying to judge the potential of the machine as of the moment, I think they might be prematurely jumping to conclusions. I personally need to use the detector for at least one entire season before I can fully make up my mind. But as of the moment, I think the Minelab Manticore is rather misunderstood.